welcome. For those of you who haven't had a chance to meet yet, I'm Cinnamon Carlarn, the very proud 19th President and Dean at Albany Law School. And I have the pleasure of being here with you tonight to welcome our speakers and just to say a word about the Sills lecture. So it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you to the Nancy M. Sills 76 Memorial Lecture. This event honors the legacy of Nancy Sills, a very distinguished alumna and dedicated advocate who I'll say a little bit more about. Her commitment to legal education and to social justice continues to inspire us and gives us this wonderful reason to be here tonight. And I believe that we have Ronnie Sills Lindbergh here, so I want to say a special hello and thank you to you for being here. And for allowing us to have this tradition and to really carry on this moment of recognizing Nancy Sills' kind of great legacy and her commitment, which we honor tonight. And so tonight we are privileged to host Professor Naomi Cahn, the Justice Anthony M. Kennedy Distinguished Professor of Law and the co-director of the Family Law Center at the University of Virginia School of Law as our Nancy Sills Memorial Lecture keynote. Her work has crosses the intersections among family law and trust and estate and feminist theory, and whether she knows it or not, I've read a lot of the work. But it's not my job to speak about that tonight. Professor Spivak is going to speak about it in a moment. And I'll also say Professor Crawford may or may not know that I know her work very well as well. So I want to thank Professor Cahn for being here, and I'll let Professor Spivak speak a little bit more to the depth and breadth of her work and the influence that it's had. But I did also want to say a welcome and thank you to our panelists for the panel that will follow the keynote speaker. And the panelists tonight are two of Professor Cahn's co-authors on her book, Hot Flash, on their book, Hot Flash, How the Law Ignores Menopause and What We Can Do About It. And just kind of, I want to say a very deep and sincere thanks for this work that really does engage a dramatically underexplored and under-talked about topic, and the impacts that has for women both medically and legally. And it's a really important time to be having this conversation, perhaps now more than ever. So thank you to all three of you for your work on that project. So thank you to Professor Bridget Crawford, who's here with us in the room and will be part of that panel, and also to their co-author, Professor Emily Gold Waldman, who is not here in the room, will be joining us by Zoom a little bit later tonight. Both Professor Crawford and Professor Waldman come to us from Pace University's Haub School of Law, so just down the road a little bit. But really with the three of them here together, and you'll hear more about their backgrounds, but you also get to hear substantively about the work they're doing. But this is the collection of kind of outstanding and really influential scholars that we have with us tonight is pretty profound. And so I just want to say thank you to each of you for being here and for joining us this evening. And on that note, I also want to say a deep and sincere thank you to Professor Spivak, who has organized this and is allowing us to have this conversation, which is a really meaningful, well, it should actually be a set of conversations on very meaningful and important topics. And finally, I did just want to return to the Sills family and thank the Sills family for their ongoing support for this lecture series. Nancy Sills was a true champion for elder rights, and this lecture series allows us to further our understanding of the legal issues, which are just becoming coming to the surface more and more. And this lecture series allows us to engage with different aspects of that. And so I want to say thank you to the family for the opportunity to both celebrate Nancy, but also to continue to come together to explore these important topics. We're very grateful. So with that, I want to say again, thank you to everyone for being here tonight. We have folks in the room, we have folks online as well. You're about to hear a terrific set of speakers on some really important events. And now I'm going to turn it over to Professor Spivak to speak a little bit more about what to expect for tonight.
Yeah, so I'm very honored to be here introducing Professor Cahn, and I will have a break after Professor Cahn's talk, and I'll introduce the professors for our book roundtable. But let me just say that Professor Cahn is an incredibly prominent scholar in all these intersecting fields: family law, estate planning, wills and trusts, reproductive rights, feminist jurisprudence. What else? I mean, all those areas of law which sort of seem to live in this private space, right? The family, the passage of wealth, but which, on the contrary, are really it deeply embedded in and mapped onto and saturated by the political and social sort of structures of which they are part, in the world of which they are part, the locality in which they are part, and are really have enormous public implication. And what one thing her work again and again sort of dissects that and makes us understand how that is. So, and I'll explain that in a minute, but Professor Cahn is both the Anthony M. Kennedy Distinguished Professor of Law at Virginia Law School and the Armistead and Doble Professor of Law, which I didn't even know was possible. But yes, and she's also co-director of the Family Law Center at Virginia School of Law. She started there in 2020 after having been at Georgetown School of Law. Oh, sorry. Oh, no, I'm really in trouble now. Gita, Oh, before, okay, that's why I said, I got the, yes. So GW, and she's in Virginia now. And so she's written, and it's more scholarly articles than I can really even count, but has also has been published in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, has been commented and spoken on NPR and many other news stations, and has also been the author of several books. And I want to mention specifically the three that I really like the most, which relate to what I was saying earlier. So first of all, red families versus blue families, just an amazing study of the different sort of ways that these families form and function in states with different political alignments, and fascinating. And anyone who thinks that the family law is private and domestic and part of this sort of separate space in society needs to read this book, because these are just a fascinating mapping of the politics of these states onto the families in these states. Also, a wonderful book called Homeward Bound about aging, and another interest of hers is elder law and all the ways that, and one of her interests is increasingly in elder law because of the 100-year, what she worked with on the Yale Law Journal, this issue about the 100-year life and dealing with all the many legal issues arising from the fact that people are living to be 100, and it's not that uncommon anymore, and all the very interesting and unaddressed legal issues that arise from that. And has also written a book about unequal families, and that also deals with the inequality enforced upon families by the political structures. So just a fascinating interplay of work to sort of pull families and inheritance into the public sphere so that we can sort of see how it all operates. And so she's going to be speaking tonight about a specific issue in elder law, aging families and step families, and the issues that arise that are unique to being older aging population with step families and step relatives. And the only thing I'll conclude with is by saying the most important thing about Professor Cahn is that we were both members of the same co-op in college, and it's a shout out. I'll just do a shout out to the 2 Dickinson Street Co-op because I can. And Professor Cahn, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And yes, we only discovered that we were members of the same co-op because we kept getting reunion emails. And one of us emailed the other and said, "Is that really you?" Because Carla graduated long after I did. Okay. So white coats, green dollars, and denim jackets. I've buried white coats, green dollars, and denim jackets as it's not quite a Where's Waldo thing, but you will see each of them coming up on some of the slides. I just want to echo the thank yous. Thank you to the Sills family. Thank you to Albany Law School. Thank you to Dean. Thank you to all of you for being here. And thanks also to Carla again. I also, as long as I'm saying, thanks to Bridget and to Emily, and I'm looking forward to our discussion after this on the roundtable. So let's see, is this going to work? Well, sometimes, not working. Okay, I will just do this without PowerPoints for the moment, but let me say that I am talking about I'm talking about step families. Aha, use the mouse. There we are. Thank you. And so I'm talking about families, that is, with step in them, which have non-joint children. And so my particular focus here is on how the law approaches these families. As we'll see, these families appear in a variety. They appear in courts, they appear in hospitals, where there are all kinds of legal conflicts over not just wills, as one might expect, but also over end-of-life care, financial management, as well as inheritance. The basic idea of the basic core thesis that I will be talking about is that the law has not really adequately adjusted to the realities and to the demographics of older step families. And older step families face the double disability, if you will, not just of being step families, but also there are various ageist stereotypes in our culture. And so step families are at the intersection of this step, not the one time, all time, forever married nuclear family, and then also at the intersection of that with ageism. So I'm going to talk briefly about, I'm going to do, the introductory material will actually be quite longer than I usually would do introductory material, then a little bit about some of the demography and psychological research, then the legal challenges, and then talk about what the law, and it's not just, I mean, as I'll say, it's not just the law, it's not just law reform, it's also legal practice that needs to change to acknowledge these families. And I will just start off by acknowledging that this work draws on, as Carla's already noted, an article that I've done with Claire Huntington and Elizabeth Scott, both at Columbia on the 100-year life. And it also draws on a forthcoming article that I'm doing for the Family Court Review with on aging step families. And I'm doing it with a therapist, Patricia Papernow, who is one of the leading step family therapists and writers in the country. So I'm drawing on that work in this lecture. Okay, so in terms of, well, okay, there's some trick to doing this, and I'm not quite sure I have it. So,
Working.
okay,
Way that it should
all right,
there.
I will.
Back to this here.
So the next slide was going to be, how many of you know the sitcom Modern Family? Okay. I was going to play you a clip from it. And the clip is this wonderful clip in which it's a clip from the wedding of Jay and Gloria. And the clip of Jay and Gloria involves having one of their, it's truly a modern step family in the sense that Gloria was married before and has a son named Manny, and Jay was married before and has 2 adult children. And so the wedding scene is the Jay Gloria wedding scene with Dee Dee, Jay's first wife, being invited. And Jay's first wife completely embarrasses herself by giving a speech essentially about how awful their relationship was, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was going to show that clip, but I think we'll just stick with this one. And I wanted to ask, I mean, as you think about sort of some of the legal issues that might come up, the clip was going to show you some of the actual issues that came up at this wedding. Just what are legal issues that might be different for Jay and Gloria than for Gloria with her first spouse or Jay and Dee Dee in their first spouse? What's the, I mean, some of the issues are going to be the same, but what else could go wrong? Jay is an indeterminate age, I think, but probably fits the demographic of being over the age of 50, probably, given that his kids both have kids who are, one has a child going off to college. He's well within the demographic. So what are the particular issues? If anybody wants to throw some out. I should have done some plants, right? I'm sorry. We can just, we can, you will miss the Modern Family clip. You will miss the Modern Family tree on, but I can just, it seems like the technology is not going to be my friend tonight. So, yeah, Melissa. Yes, that's such, right, critical issue. Will the stepkids inherit? So essentially, will Manny inherit from Jay? And the background law, of course, is that unless Jay adopts Manny, so long as there are numerous relatives in between them, Manny's not going to inherit. Okay. So you mean will Manny inherit? Essentially, will Manny inherit from his stepfather, who is married to his mother, and he's apparently enjoying quite a nice lifestyle. So might want to inherit. And along those lines, will Jay then who will pay for Manny to go to college? Right. So, I mean, those are, so there are issues that come up during the marriage, as well as, of course, at death with respect to inheritance. Okay. Huge issue. When Patricia Papernow, the therapist, and I talk about the article, this is something she sees in practice all the time, is people forget about, will the stepkids inherit in the absence of a written document providing otherwise? And I'll talk for a bit about some of the research on would Jay want Manny to inherit? Okay, other issues? Insurance benefits, yes, have those all been changed? Does Jay want them all changed to Gloria? Many of them don't actually need to be changed because of revocation upon divorce laws, but some of them certainly do. So has Jay had a very good family law attorney who has paid attention to those issues? Yeah. Okay, so what's going to happen to, does Gloria move into Jay's house? What about, does that then become the marital home? Will she inherit it? What will happen to that? Yeah. Yes, we have an incredibly complicated blended family, because if Manny inherits, what about Jay's children's inheritance? Yeah, do they get, I mean, how do we manage the inheritance with children and grandchildren? And then it gets more complicated, because I said step have non-joint children. There might also be joint children. And in fact, Gloria and Jay do go on to have a child together. So, right, I mean, what's not to like about all of these tensions? And when I get to teach elder law again, hopefully the PowerPoint will be working, and I will be able to show the clip of what actually happens at the wedding.
If you just.
Oh, great. Okay, so there they are. We can keep going. So just keep pressing.
Yeah,
Which
just
side?
the left.
Okay, great. So there's there's the wonderful family tree, and you can see all of the complications here. For those of you who've never watched it, don't know anything about it, but you can see it's Gloria and Javier, Jay and Dee Dee, and then their kids and Joe. So there are separate non-adopted children. Claire and Mitchell are never adopted by Gloria. I don't believe Manny's ever adopted by Jay, so we have true stepchildren. And I should clarify that when I'm saying stepchildren, I am talking about non-adopted children. So I'm talking about children outside of a legal relationship, although there may well be very strong ties between them. Okay. Oops. So, right, we've already talked about that. This was going to be the clip with the two of them explaining. And so I've already said this, but just to sort of come back to this core theme, family law tends to focus on younger families. Trusts and estates law developed out of one marriage families. The elective share allows the surviving spouse to take a forced share from the estate, regardless of non-joint children and regardless of a will. Obviously, that's true in I did take the New York bar, so that was true, at least when I took the New York bar. And then health law also makes the same assumptions, appoints a spouse as a surrogate decision maker. And going back to Jay and Gloria, unclear who Jay actually would have, if Jay does not have any advanced medical directives, it's unclear just who Jay would have wanted to make medical decisions for him in the case of incapacity. So the law is just not quite catching up to these aging step families in terms of these assumptions. Okay. So before Modern Family, we had the Brady Bunch, again, another blended family. And so I want to turn to talk a little bit about some of the demographics. There's a lot of research on, and there's a lot of psychological, sociological research on step families with minor children, but much less on step families with grown children. Patricia and I have scoured the literature on that. And there's also, I mean, if we start talking about older step families, there are two different types. One is when we have the aging of younger step families. So the Brady Bunch might be an example of that. And then there's gray divorce. The divorce rate after the age of 50 has doubled over the past 2 decades. And many of those people who are divorced then recouple. So and then there's also cohabitation, which I will talk a little bit more about as well. Percentage of the population, and I sometimes talk about people over the age of 50. I sometimes talk about people over the age of 65. I am limited by the research that has been done, and so I'm reporting to you on the research that has been done. This is the percentage of the population over the age of 65, and you can see that it is growing, right, from 8% in 1950 to 22% it's projected to grow to almost a quarter of the population. So many more aging step families are certainly going to be possible. Number of divorces per year by those ages 50 plus in the US, also growing. And so that means then the possibility of more recoupling. Okay, a little complicated here. So let me just parse through. Let me just parse through this chart. There are 3 things to see from this chart. First, in both 1990 and 2021, the divorce rate declines with age. Okay, that is, older people are less likely to get divorced. Second, however, the variation in divorce rate by age was much smaller in 2021 than in 1990. So the divorce rate for those ages 35 to 44 in 1990 was almost 6 times the divorce rate for those over the age of 65. In 2021, it was only 3 times. So as the divorce rate goes, even if the divorce rate is going down for younger families, it's going up for older families. Okay, and then the third thing to say is between 1990, and this is pretty obvious, between 1990 and 2021, the divorce rate increased for both women and men ages 45 and older versus it declined for everybody else. So it's those last 3, you can see an increase, whereas for everybody else, it goes down. So, so that's the demographic background for all of these people who are getting remarried. We actually do not have great statistics on older recoupling. I'm showing you what I found, but the remarriage, it's kind of, I mean, I don't know. I look at this and I'm kind of surprised, but if you look at, and this is, it's old and it's only gone up, percent of new marriages, just over half, 60% are first marriages for both, 20% for one spouse, and then 20% for both spouses. So a lot more step families are being formed. Similarly, the number of step families, there we are. The number of cohabitors over age 50 has also increased. This is Pew. Bowling Green State University has amazing research on, in fact, coined the term gray divorce, amazing research on, but you can see that the number of cohabitors, it's still smaller than for people at younger ages, the percentages, but it's also increased. And so more step families are formed as in this manner as well. 40% of middle-aged and older couples with children are in step families, either married or cohabiting. And as you get, there are fewer step parents, fewer step couplings for Americans over the age of 70, reflecting in part the baby boom divorce. Okay, so that's the demographic. Yeah. This would be widow. It doesn't matter how you became uncoupled in terms of this being these statistics on remarriage. So some of the remarried people are divorced, some of them are widowed, ditto with cohabitors. Yeah, thanks. Okay. So now we come to Chris. Now we come to some of the family therapy information. And Patricia has identified five types of challenges for step families. And so before I turn to the legal issues, I want to address some of the social and psychological challenges to aging step families that frame the legal issues. And so Patricia, I'm drawing on her work. She knows this. She's delighted. She said, the more people who know about my work, the better, because one of her goals is to make sure that not just people in the therapy psychology community, but that lawyers also know about her work. So she said that the first thing is parents and step parents do not have shared attachment with each other's children. And going back to Jay and Gloria, who comes into the family's life when the children are adults, is going to have much less of a connection to Mitchell and Claire. Of course, Jay, who comes into Manny's life at an earlier age, will have a stronger connection. But in general, there are not the shared attachments. They haven't grown up together. And so the concept that she uses is this idea of stuck insiders and stuck outsiders. And so what happens here is that the stuck insiders, this is an example, the step parent could also have a child, but the parent is a stuck insider, stuck by being an insider to the other, to the step parent, and stuck as an insider to the child, versus the step parent is a stuck outsider. Certainly an insider to the parent, but an outsider to the child. And so this just designed to show that there are tensions in step families with the emotional attachments. Other challenges that identified is often step parents are, when the step parents recouple or remarry, they are absolutely thrilled. Children, however, may be grief-stricken and resistant. What? You are remarrying and you're remarrying this person? What? You're living with this person? A lot of times they're very accepting as well. So I don't want to say this is what always happens, but there certainly can be resistance. And then, of course, parents and step parents are going to have very different reactions to the adult children's behavior. Step families bring together two different established ways of doing things. This is especially true for gray recouplers because they have decades-long traditions with a family and decades-long ways of doing things. And then the fifth challenge is that there's always going to be in this, if we go, I'm not going to try to go back, but if we go back to that step parent chart that I just had, there's always still going to be another person who is the parent of that child, whether that person is still alive or deceased. And so that's another potential psychological challenge in these families. Okay, so that's from the psychology perspective. For all aging families, of course, for all people who are aging, regardless, I have to say I teach a new course on single people and the law, and this is certainly something that we talk about in that course as well. So caregiving, so in addition to the psychological issues involved in step families, certainly with aging step families, there are issues of caregiving. Who is in an older adult's network of care? How will prior union formation and dissolution behaviors affect actual care networks? Very important to our work. What is the role of gender? And so this larger question of how will changing family structures affect how care is provided. There are some studies of caretaking that actually do show, and this is, I suppose, not surprising, older parents in need of care were more than twice as likely to receive care from their adult children if they had biological instead of step families. So if their children were biological or adopted, if they were legal children, they were much more likely to get care from their legal children than they were from stepchildren. No surprise on that, although this part did surprise me. Unmet needs among older parents did not differ by family structure. And so that means that possibly a subsequent spouse or partner is providing that additional care. Okay, so that's kind of background to the role of law. And we can talk about, or I can talk about, and we can talk in questions more about legal reform. Maybe we need legal reform, maybe we don't. Legal practice, we certainly need some reforms. And so, this is actually, I've stated this, but it's a question. Does the law meet the needs of older adults with respect to forming new families, caretaking, and death? Maybe what we instead need to be doing is to be providing far more options to these families so that they can opt into various structures, something that I will also talk about. Inequality across lifetime means that people reach old age in very different positions. Lower income adults are, because of a lifetime of inequality, including healthcare inequities, have needs that can be exacerbated by older age, as well as, of course, financial situations. And I just want to say that these issues arise regardless of income. One of the books, I'm so glad that Carla mentioned the book that we did on kind of networks of care called Homeward Bound, where we talked to the children of parents who had died in Baton Rouge. Most of the people with whom we spoke were in lower income families where there was not enough, where insurance benefits premiums had not been paid, they were not available, there were virtually no wills, nobody ever went to probate court, but jean jackets were the things that were most likely to be fought about. So it wasn't dollars, because there were no dollars to fight about, but a treasured possession was something that caused an enormous amount of conflict between stepchildren and the legal children of the deceased. So I just want to note that although there's a tendency in wealth transfer law or trust and estates to talk about wealth transfer, we need to look at many different kinds of wealth and many different kinds of inheritances that are important to people in both first families and in subsequent families. So in terms of legal reform, okay, I'm not going to obviously teach all of trust and estates to those of you who don't know about trust and estates, but just very basically, in the US, when a partner dies without a will, in many states, although not for those of you in T&E under the Uniform Probate Code, but when a partner dies without a will, the parent's children, but not stepchildren, are going to get something. I think that's pretty true. I think that's true in New York. It's not true under the Uniform Probate Code where there are only joint children. But in virtually all states of which I'm aware, where someone dies without a will and there are non-joint children, then all of the legal children of the decedent will take property. However, with a will, one can completely rewrite that, and one can, as we've already discussed, one can leave, the testator can leave all property to a new spouse. So cutting out not just stepkids, but also cutting out the decedent's children from an earlier relationship. And so there are legitimate questions about how to protect children from earlier families through inheritance law. Forced heirship is one option. Our colleague Phyllis Tate has talked about forced heirship to ensure that children can get a guaranteed forced share of the estate, even if their parent leaves everything to a new spouse. Other legal reforms, what about in married stepfamilies? I've already mentioned the elective share. Maybe there should be a waiver of the elective share upon marriage, even in the the elective share, the forced share that a surviving spouse can take against a will, can be waived in a prenuptial agreement or in a postnuptial agreement. But maybe without even any kind of such agreement, there should be a waiver of that forced share upon remarriage as a way of ensuring that if the decedent decided to leave property to children from an earlier relationship, that those children get the property. Vesting of the forced share after a certain number of years. Just to be absolutely clear, non-marital partners get nothing. They have no rights to an elective share unless the testator writes a will. I've already mentioned this idea of possibly changing marriage systems and perhaps having more options available to people if they want to formalize their relationship. And so not having for gray recouplers, it's not marriage with all of marriage's rights or cohabitation with no rights, but maybe being able to opt into a different kind of a status. Not just civil unions or domestic partnerships, which have many of the same rights as marriage, but something sort of in between. Colorado has a designated beneficiary system. Germany is currently in the midst of considering a system in which you wouldn't even have to be, intimate partners. So possibly more options for these relationships. Changing the Family and Medical Leave Act, which does not include step-parents, although of course that is possible in some states to have them included. There are also a number of issues that are not law reform per se, or that take place in courts, but lawyers and other professionals need to be thinking about some of the issues that we talked about already with respect to how to advise these step families. And so doing some kind of training in step family issues, or at least Patricia and I are developing guidelines and questions to help people plan for decision making. A lot of planning that needs to be done for financial issues. Okay, there's my green dollar sign. Just sort of what should happen. Should stepchildren inherit? Should there be trusts set up where a family has wealth for purposes of providing for all children? And I should note that there's a really, really wonderful study done by two Yale law school professors, Yair Listokin and John Morley, where they did empirical research on what people would like. And what they found was that although the law has little preference for stepchildren, but they found, as they put it, quote, surprising generosity to stepchildren. And they found that stepchildren were preferred even over the decedent's parents and siblings. Current law prefers parents and siblings and grandparents and their descendants over stepchildren, even in states that recognize stepchildren. That's not what their empirical study actually found. So important to include and to think about stepchildren, a series of questions to help identify the stepfamily's values as they are thinking about this. What are the practices and values with which you grew up? What kinds of things do you feel are important for your adult kids to pay for yourselves? Because you can imagine in stepfamilies that if one parent is wealthier than the other, that the stepkids might feel somewhat left out. Do you want to provide the same support to stepchildren? A whole series of other questions, but because I want to get to hot flash, I can save them for Q&A. And then of course, here's the white coats, right? Here's of course, incapacity planning is another huge issue. Who do step parents want to take care of them when they are no longer able to take care of themselves? I'll go through objections really quickly. Does this idea of alternative forms of family structure somehow undercut marriage? Does allowing for this wealth preservation replicate inequality? And then there are all of these challenges of actually implementing some of these trainings or some of these options. And so kind of like final consideration in all of these families is the importance of communication with children and stepchildren, having adult children involved, and making sure that almost literally everybody is on the same page, at least with respect to knowing what the step parents are planning. And that can also then subsequently preempt later challenges and later court proceedings as the children fight one another, as someone tries to rescind a healthcare power of attorney, et cetera. And so, kind of in conclusion, let me just say that there are a range of issues that aging stepfamilies confront with respect to the law, that legal reform might in fact be able to deal with, and also with respect to legal practice in terms of questions that practitioners need to be aware of as they practice with stepfamilies. So thank you very much.
We have this amazing double header tonight. So we had this wonderful talk by Professor Cahn. We're now going to have a wonderful sort of book chat roundtable about a book she co-authored with Professor Crawford, who is somewhere. Oh, there you are. Oh, there you are. Great. And Professor Waldman, who is online. Megan, we should be able to, can we get her? So can we show her? Great. And so they, well, let me introduce, first of all, I've introduced Professor Cahn. Professor Crawford is a distinguished professor at Elizabeth Howe School of Law at Pace University, where she teaches tax and trust and estates primarily. She's a very prolific scholar, and the book we're going to talk about is one that she co-authored with Professor Cahn and Professor Waldman called, it's not up there, Hot Flash. Yes, and we do have books here for people who ordered them. They will for signing, and you can buy some here outside because we're, you know, that is not beneath us at all. And but it's a really good book. And again, it's about sort of this private matter, which is actually very political and very much a part of the public sphere, in that the public sphere determines how we deal with it and address it and even think about it. And before that, and so and she co-authored that with Professor Cahn and Professor Waldman, who is also professor at Elizabeth Howe School of Law at Pace University, who teaches subjects that are kind of that you'd think of in connection to these private matters like menstruation and menopause, con law, civil procedure, labor law. That was a laugh line. Hello. But it makes perfect sense, right? Because these are issues that are in fact embedded in our whole public sphere, in the way we think about gender and in the body and things like that. So so before that, they co-authored a book. Professor Crawford and Professor Waldman co-authored a book about menstruation, challenging the law's silence on menstruation. It's called, what is it called? Sorry, menstruation period. Menstruation Matters, that's right, I'm sorry. Menstruation Matters, challenging the law's silence on periods. So that's, and they've also been at the scholarly forefront of period poverty and the movement against taxation of menstrual products and more broadly access to menstrual products. And so then what was the natural next step was this book, The Hot Flash, How the Law Ignores Menopause and What We Can Do About It. So without more ado, I will just let them maybe chat. If you have thought of what you want to say, feel free. It'd be interesting to know sort of what made you sort of light upon that topic and what excites you about it. But whatever else you want to say about it is great.
Professor Waldman and I had been working on a book about menstruation and law, and you may think, what's a tax professor doing writing about menstruation? Well, it was totally obvious to me that these products that were then taxed in up to 35 states were the subject of a lot of secrecy and stigma in society. And I thought it was super interesting that menstrual products were subject to tax in the state of New York at the time I started doing this research. But related products like Viagra and condoms and Rogaine were tax-free. And so it's actually Carla and I who wrote the very first article at the intersection of taxation and menstruation. Then when I was presenting that work at my home institution, Emily Waldman, my colleague who teaches con law, was in the audience and said to me, hey, what's this argument that some people are trying to make about equal protection being violated? So long story short, we developed an argument that a sales tax on menstrual products is a form of gender discrimination. And that argument has formed the blueprint for litigation in many states, and 15 states down, 20 still to go, where menstrual products are subject to taxation. Connection with that book, we started planning. What do law professors plan? Law review symposium. We thought, wouldn't it be great to have a law review symposium about law and menstruation? And of course, why wouldn't we have this? And explore the many ways that menstruation matters in school. It matters in jails, prisons, detention facilities. It matters at food banks. It matters in homeless shelters. It matters in environmental law in terms of what products contain, how they're disposed of, how they pollute our oceans and waterways. And in connection with planning for that symposium, we received a proposal from Naomi Cahn saying, hey, what about talking about the absence of menstruation, the other end of the reproductive life cycle, or menopause? And it's Naomi Cahn who wrote the very first essay about the intersection of menopause and law and mapping out a wonderful research agenda. And I'll let her pick up the story from here.
Okay, so I very tentatively, this is Bridget and I know each other from President States, etc. Circle, circles. Do we have? No. Okay. And so I was very might possibly be interested in these sensations of periods, and I wasn't sure what the response was, and a very, very enthusiastic response, and not just an enthusiastic response. When I did a very drafty first draft of it, Bridget and Emily gave me such a wealth of knowledge about these issues, such amazing comments, that the three of us started to talk about writing one law review article together on menopause. I mean, it just comes out of the work that so wonderfully, and it comes out I've taught elder law, I teach elder law 4. I'm so jealous that you get elder law every semester here. And so it comes out of several different overlapping areas. So speaking of that, Albany is an professor expert. So we wrote an article through on talking about workplace discrimination based on menopause. And out of that article, grew our article, and then, but as a third article, we turned to each other and said, maybe there's hope. The book that some of you are holding in your hands is the result. But just I think two other issues to say about that. I mean, first of all, 6,000 people reach menopause in the US every day. But millions more are experiencing perimenopause, the period before menopause. Menopause is medically defined as the 1 year period that after periods stop. And for that moment, for that 1 year, there are many symptoms that many people experience. And in fact, we did a Zoom book launch for the book the day before. Now, I think there were 6 of us on the Zoom book launch, and the moderator, after hearing another of the speakers, best she'd experienced 3 hot flashes just during Zoom. Webinar, but the other thing that she said, and this is the second point I want to make, so a lot of people are going through this. The second point I wanted to make is that menopause is starting to come. And so we undertook this work. We started writing this 3 or 4 years ago. But my son menopause is everywhere. There was just in the past few weeks, which are Times, New York Times about a physician who's in a business menopause. I just had something from Washington Post yesterday, my hometown newspaper, about how perimenopause is suddenly hot. And right, and so we've had Michelle Obama speak about it. Oprah's talked about her experiences, and so there is a lot more publicity and a lot more openness. And the moderator of that session, the Zoom session, said before our discussion on Zoom, she's not sure she ever said something like that in public. And so one thing to say is for a long time, which says it's true with the period, menopause has been something that is subjected to stigma, silence, not being talked about. And so what we're having with this moment is more and more people coming forward to talk about it, to start to resolve.
We got Professor Waldman.
She's not.
Oh, okay. What do we talk about in this book? How can you write a whole book about menopause and the law? So we start off with a chapter about the cultural stigma and shame surrounding menopause. I know I never had a conversation in my own family of origin about menopause. I knew it existed, but I don't think I got any information about it. We talk a lot about the inadequacy of the employment law to address menopause. Because on the one hand, menopause symptoms can be debilitating for some people, but not for everyone. On the other hand, menopause is an inevitable stage of life, and so there's nothing abnormal about it. And the law is really designed, the law that is the disability law is designed to address abnormal bodies, not normal bodies. We look at cultural issues, employment issues. We look at how this inevitable life stage is medicalized, where there's a pill for everything, including ways to stay forever young. Only people would just take these hormones, but then how the lack of serious investment in women's health has meant that we don't have as much good science as we should. We also talk about the commercialization of this inevitable stage of life. Menopause is profitable. Menopause is profitable for investors. The menopause gold rush is what the press calls all of these companies looking to cash in on fears about aging and desirability, and seeking to harness technology to entice folks experiencing menopause, enter very, very personal information into apps that are not protected by law to keep your health data safe. We see employers offering menopause apps as benefits, but how beneficial is it when your employer knows how many periods you've missed this year? And when and against whom might that information be weaponized? At the end of the book, and then I'll turn it over to Professor Waldman, at the end of the book, we ask, where might we see opportunities for reform in the law, and who would join together to reform the law? Because young people don't want to talk about old people because nobody wants to be old. And the old folks think they've got different issues than young people. But we really map out a way in which folks who are interested in gender, folks who are interested in age, and folks who are interested in disability might all come together to rethink this inevitable life stage that sits at that intersection. So I'll turn it over to Professor Waldman.
Thanks. And I can't see people, but hopefully all of you can see me.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think one of the most exciting things about the book, and one of the things that I found the most interesting to explore with my co-authors, was, as Professor Crawford said, the idea that menopause is really part of a larger conversation, that it's really about one phase of the reproductive life cycle that people will experience at a certain point, but it's the very same people often who have experienced one or more of pregnancy, breastfeeding, and certainly menstruation. And one of the things that we found so interesting to think about was the way that all of these reproduction-associated conditions, processes, give rise to really common needs at work, whether it is needs for bathroom breaks, needs for climate control, needs for uniform adjustments or dress code adjustments, needs for flexible schedules, at times need for remote work. And to the extent that we think about menopause as part of that larger conversation and contextualize it, rather than just thinking very specifically about what the needs of people experiencing menopausal symptoms may be, we think that sort of broader net is a productive way of thinking. And it really opens the door to thinking more generally about how we can make workplaces more accommodating for everyone in a way that policies develop that people are happy to have because they know that they may be able to benefit from them too. And it's less about sort of holding out one particular employee as different. So I think that idea of contextualizing menopause is one of the things that was the most exciting for me, at least, to think about in the course of all of the research that we've done together, situating menopause alongside those other processes.
We look at what associates menopause with pregnancy, and we have a chapter that explores what it's like to be trans, experiencing or not experiencing menopause. And so that was an important part of the book to be exploring, to be discussing, to be finding whatever literature there is on that. So it's there's a lot, it's a fairly, it's about 200 pages, but that provided lots of opportunity for exploring how a number of different experiences intersected with legal approaches. And so, yes, one of the central issues is how do we change places, but it's also how do we change healthcare? How do we change stigma associated with that?
Yeah. Let me see. I'm happy to sort of open up for questions and see what people's thoughts are. And oh yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. You'll have to a little louder.
Testing 1 2. You mentioned, Professor Crawford, that menopause is being is marketable, but what exactly is being sold? Data, like menstrual cups, period products. That all goes along with menstruation. What is the product here?
You can only see my the ads that come to me on social media. There's nothing like being a 55-year-old woman and getting ads for cooling pajamas, cooling pillowcases, special portable fans, special clothing, moisture wicking clothing, wearable devices that work to be able to predict when you're going to have a hot flash, for which you pay the privilege of $129.99. As well as for folks who have perimenopausal bleeding or perimenopausal bleeding at all, the usual access to tampons, pads, and cups. Then there's a whole group of celebrities that are cashing in on vitamins, face creams, body products, a whole line of very expensive things being sold, playing on fears about using stereotypical femininity, but at the same time invoking language that invites the user through consumption to take charge of their own lives. So there's this tension between the empowerment narrative and the femininity preservation narrative, undergirded by what we call menopause capitalism. This search for using anxiety about the aging female or feminine body in particular as a profit source.
And we should note that it's actually somewhat paradoxical, because on the one hand, right, it's capitalizing on, and these are we trace this back historically, the idea that once you achieve menopause, you are old forever, you're dried up, you're wrinkled, who would ever want to spend any time with you, who would want to work with you, who would want to be partners with you. So it's playing to some extent on that. On the other hand, the fact that you are being bombarded means that it's helping to dissolve some of the stigma around it. It's helping to sort of normalize talking about it. So it's paradoxical. It's both capitalizing on it, but also helping to solve stigma. There's also all kinds of treatments that are both medically proven in this area in a broad term, but that have been around for a long time, have been tested, as well as newer treatments. So it's not just it's the wearables, it's functions, it's all of that, but there's also treatments, alternative treatments, et cetera. So it's quite and I think people have not gone to look for it as a teach about donor conception. And so if you haven't gone gamete shopping, you have no idea that there's a market out there for sperm and eggs and what it looks like. Same thing, I think, with menopause, this menopausal capitalism. and you've done sort of one or two searches for it, you're not necessarily sure it's there, and then suddenly you're overwhelmed with all of this. So yes, it's out there. For some of us.
It also strikes me that it's also a perverse use of feminism, right? In a way, like this empowerment sort of narrative. Is that you see that as well? Like you're in charge, take charge of your body or whatever by buying more stuff. I don't know. It just seems like
Yeah, take charge of your health, take charge of your life.
Yeah.
And be the same person you've always been. With this health as well. Yeah, it's for again, but it's two-sided.
Right.
That's it's this double message.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd just like to share a message for young women who are attending and men. Anyone, I find it fabulous. Like people are not celebrating it back then. I don't have to buy those products. I feel free. I mean, it's like the greatest thing that ever happened. Not really, but it's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So go Menopause.
Bodies ourselves. Anybody even remember? Yeah. There was a section in there about that, celebrating that. Don't forget with that anymore. Yes. Yeah. So yeah.
And Elizabeth Cady Stanton, it's wrote when she got through it, and she felt liberated. So yes, that's definitely, it is definitely a theme. Anybody ever watched, gosh, I'm not good on popular, this is my third one tonight.
I know.
Yes.
There is an amazing scene that we use, and then we can also go back to All in the Family. But the amazing scene in Fleabag where one of the characters talks about the liberation of menopause. I won't repeat it because it's
Oh, they've been using it.
but she talks about just how liberating it is to be free of various infections, as well as we can get it from it would come up. Yeah.
I was gonna say, this is not really anything except that there's another cultural tidbit that I think is situated in this. And elaborate, that is interesting to situate in this, which I probably think the person to remember this, I have very weird memory, but when I was a little girl, I learned about menopause, not from my mother or grandmother, but from the Golden Girls. There's an entire episode in which they talk, it's a whole other, like, they don't talk about it, and Blanche is going through it and she's so ashamed. And do you know,
There was
That's
yes, there was an All in the Family on, and I was like 10 years old, and I was like, what are they talking about? Because they don't actually say it. They like say the change, like they dance around it. So I actually am gonna go back to watch it, but I remember it. And my mom was a totally open person, but she was probably in her 40s. But I was like, I knew about periods. I knew whatever. It was just interesting that was like so isolated. But that it was like, and that's how they handled it. I just think
no, we'll have to track that down at Golden Girls.
yes, there's a
We're
totally
in the family, but we don't
there's totally an episode. There's totally an episode where Blanche is so ashamed.
Yeah.
Right,
Right,
because she's stubborn, and then they talk about at this moment, I'll talk about the first kind of period, but I know because I remember I was like, what did my grandma have sex? I know this question.
I want to add a little plug for well, of all ages and all genders, and why everyone should care about this issue. There's those who will experience menopause and different views about whether it's liberating or oppressive, something to be ashamed of or something to celebrate. But for all of us who work with other human beings, to be aware of the many ways that menopause can dramatically impact someone's performance at work is important. And so people of all kinds should feel comfortable and know that they are adding value to the workforce when you bring up menopause as something that needs to be taken into account in designing leave policies, in employee benefits and things like that. When you ask, when there are surveys and employees are asked, what do you need most to support you through menopause at work? The answer is almost always, I need a supervisor who understands what menopause is. And that's a supervisor without regard to gender identity. So we all have a role to play in destigmatizing this topic and treating it as the inevitable life stage that it is for our colleagues, if not for ourselves. Oh, Emily, do you want to add?
Yes, I was just going to add one thing. I completely agree with that. And I think the other thing we found, so people want a supervisor who understands, and people want policies. People want something they can look to that addresses menopause so that the burden isn't on them to raise it out of the blue. They want some sort of policy that they can refer to. I think to some extent, people want there to be a policy even more than they know exactly what they want to be in the policy. They just want something. And when you think about it, more and more, I mean, workplaces have policies regarding pregnancy, breastfeeding, maternity leave, things like that. But it historically has been unusual for there to be a menopause policy, but that's a push. And that's something we really saw happening already in the UK. And the idea of that policy, it sort of normalizes it. It takes the burden off the individual. It starts the conversation.
And just to clarify, when we talk about menopause, we are not talking about just that 1 year or just sort of cessation of the period. We are talking about a period that can last, and it varies with the individual person. It varies also based on race, but it can last 6 to 8 years or longer before the actual menopause happens, and then it can last after as well for conditioning symptoms. So we're talking about a significant chunk. If we're just talking about the workplace, a significant chunk of working life. Yeah, so maybe one more than.
I apologize if this is in the book. I've only 3 chapters in, but just in terms of trying to get policy, is there an argument to be made that it impacts the economy? I mean, I'm just thinking about my family, women in my family, and people in my family have had to retire early, all the way down to, my mom has bought like 1 million little fans on Amazon, like, just so many different ways that it's impacted the economy, like for better or for worse. I don't know if that's something you could speak to, or if there's any statistics on that.
Absolutely. And in fact, there was a big article in Bloomberg, and I'm trying to remember the date of it now. It was while we were working on the book and looking in particular at the UK about millions of dollars being lost annually. And the Mayo Clinic actually has done a similar study in the United States. When you sort of quantify the numbers of people who are either leaving work, as you said, retiring earlier than they were planning to, or cutting down on their hours, or not being able to show up on particular days, even if they haven't officially switched to a part-time schedule. When you realize how many sort of work hours are being lost because there are so many people leaving work or cutting down on work due to menopausal symptoms, because their workplaces aren't being accommodating, or they're not even raising it because they assume, you know, the accommodations wouldn't be there. That's part of what the idea of the menopause policies would address. And so absolutely it affects and it just had never been thought about really as an economic issue. And the other thing I'll just mention is that there's been really interesting neurological research, in particular by a researcher named Lisa Mosconi, who is at New York Presbyterian. She recently wrote a book called The Menopause Brain. And it's about the fact that there is this menopausal transition that, at least for some people, does have sort of temporary effects that are neurological, nothing major, but sort of temporary sort of issues that people are dealing with, sometimes brain fog, things like that. But then people, for the most part, come out of it on the other side, and the brain sort of has this incredible plasticity and recovers, sort of the brain changes a little bit in ways that are actually beneficial. And so the idea is, if you have policies that enable people to work through menopause, they get through to the other side and they are extremely productive workers. People's brains develop in all sorts of ways. And so it really is such a loss when people are retiring or cutting down on work because of this temporary need for accommodation that they're not getting.